Hello, everybody, and thanks for coming and taking your time to see this presentation. I'm Gray Holland, and I'm going to be talking about UX tools and the design challenges in the context of engineering-driven world that we live in. Just a quick background, I started out as a car designer, became a product designer, got into digital tools, got more and more into designing 3D software, and eventually spent the last 10 years really working on solving big systemic problems in 3D animation, 3D CAD, and 3D industrial design. And at this point, got into the need that there was one thing really missing, which was CAD or computer-aided design for UX. And so I discovered Qt Design Studio on a project last year, which I'm going to show you a little more about in a minute. And it really changed my life, so I want to talk about that. Maybe the only thing that you might be familiar with my work is that I essentially invented a 3D navigation cube on a project for Autodesk. It's become a ubiquitous standard for the 3D industry. So back to our title, UX tools and design challenges. I'm going to do something that my engineer and sort of decompose this. What am I talking about here? Well, on the one side, we have our design challenges and we have our UX tools, but we live in designers live in an engineering world. It's not always easy to communicate our ideas, and in the end, it has to be developed. Nothing, no matter what I can imagine, if it can't be developed or it can't be communicated how to develop it, then it doesn't get built. And that's really the essence of computer-aided design for me. So I want to focus on what are these challenges? Well, at a very high level, and it might seem obvious, but it doesn't always have the case, that you really need 100% buy-in from management. If management's not behind it, you're not going. It's a long road. It's a difficult road. You really need people that are going to be behind your project. Next level is that committed from the development research. If you don't have a CTO or a development architect that's into UX participation into the project, it will also won't work out. You really need it. I was really lucky working with Tim Luton as the architect for the SIA project, which I'm going to show you now. He was not just into it from a leadership standpoint, he was pushing for it. In fact, he was pushing me to get more and more involved in the development process. So that was great. And then the last, you really have to have a great developer to partner with. Again, each one of these cases, these are all human issues. We need good partners. We need people that want to work with us, and there's no replacing that. And I was also lucky to work with Lukash. He is an expert Qt guy. He's one of the best guys to work with. He's really into experimentation, and that's a really important part of meeting halfway. As I experiment and he's experimenting, we're going back and forth. And then the last component, which is what Qt Designer is allowing us to do now, is essentially give a place, a common language, a place for a shared tool between development and UX. This is what that CAD was for me way back when I was an industrial designer, doing industrial design work, getting into 3D. Here I'm now getting into 4D. And the ability to develop something that produces code, and that the code can be at least managed and even integrated into a product and being part of the tooling process. That's really key. Focusing on what it's like to work with a great developer partner, and then how we use tools to create that common language to be able to interact and communicate our ideas and take responsibility for our own domain of expertise, and still allow that nice gray area in between for new ideas to germinate and really happen. So let's get into the project I'm talking about. So client was a structural engineering software called SIA. It's just 3D structural analysis on buildings. And the key was to take something that looked fairly ancient, sort of Windows 95 on a good day, and essentially transform it into a next generation product. So our goals were to, really minimize all the UI input, all the GUI components, and get more focused on the work. And that meant having the user interface show up in a just-in-time or on-demand method. On-demand. What this meant is that the GUI would show up just in time and on demand. It was only there when I needed it. And again, one of my philosophies is the best UI is no UI until you need it. And so I'm going to talk about one of the biggest innovations on the project, which was about window and UI, window handling, and how we actually divide and conquer the notions of floating dialogues, anchored dialogues, and also docked elements. And so we really kind of strategically separated these elements into obviously the GUI controls, the command and inputs themselves, and we call this combination of that into UI containers. We call it the UI glass layer, and that's essentially the interface itself that's floating above there, and we called it sort of a HUD or heads-up display. And then the bottom part was the model canvas level. This was the working space, and this area could share both UI dedicated space and 3D and 2D workspaces, so modeling spaces, so to speak. And that was how we were going to achieve this sort of open framework. And it was an incredible amount of definition. And so just how Windows handled, how do you drag and drop, how do you move them, how do you tear them out, how do you reposition them? We really wanted something elegant, intuitive, and I guess I had a pet desire to really innovate here, make something that not only opened the space up for work, but also was so simple to use, so intuitive. But you can see, how do you put all these, there's a lot of definition, a lot of details, how do they end up manifesting into spec? This was essentially our spec. How do we get started breaking down this thing, decomposing into step-by-step methods? So one of the things that we looked at was, how do we look at this anchoring concept, this floating glass level or HUD level, and the idea of being able to have a panel, like a properties panel or something like that, and essentially anchor it to any point and have it stick there. It could either float or it could stick to an object. Again, this is not a new concept, but how do we do that? How do we make it a sort of drag and drop simple? And so we had side and corner based anchoring in each individual window. So every window had the potential to have a corner anchor or a side or bottom or top anchor. Then we also had the needs of the ability to, well, what if I dock it? I want to dock it and share this square space, or do I want it to be docked at the application edge? So this created a level of complexity that we initially didn't think of, and as soon as we got in development, they're like, hey, how are we going to solve this problem? And so we brainstormed quite a bit. The idea is that obviously if I anchor it to the bottom, it would fill in to the application edge, and the other opportunity was to fill actually to that individual window and share and split that window. So that would be the result of those two moves. And from that point, we just started Agile Development, and we looked at how to solve that problem with Lukash. And what was really amazing is with such a creative DV partner, we had an epiphany. So those gray areas that I kind of, or orange areas that I highlighted to kind of say, here is where we should, this is the area or the target for our drag and drop. And Lukash did a really good job and basically took it very literally. And he was also, again, the whole notion of this was to create a way of communicating what we were looking. I imagined that these areas would be transparent, but and so I was just highlighting them to show it to Lukash, and then Lukash was doing the same thing, creating these hotspots and color coding. He started color coding them, kind of say, hey, this is how it will work. And we both went and go, we both kind of had this epiphany and go, this is really cool. In fact, how do I know to drag it there? And so that was really the epiphany was, well, what's good for communicating between development and design and development is also good UX or good communication to the client or to the customer using the software. So then we got excited about that, decided to actually make that part of the product. And so we started, again, it looks kind of the same when we started solving some of the more delicate things like, well, what happens when you cross a border from one to the other? How does that switching goes? What the notion here was that the mouse cursor, the thing would show up as soon as the panel touched the pink area, but then when the cursor crossed over that, that would determine whether it was on this side or that side. And that worked the same thing in the corner. The cursor and the bounding box of the panel were used in conjunction to help define this. And if I let go, it would snap to that. And what was interesting too, as we go forward, we're like, well, we really need this secondary highlight area, not just, this would be the, oh, I wanted to reuse that area with the mouse. When the mouse entered that area, it means dock it at that point. And then if it got to the very edge of the application, we give another indication, feedback, that it's going to anchor along that edge. And so this would be sort of how that would work. We get down to this point. Well, now the cursor is in this target area, so there the predictive feedback says, oh, it's going to be inside there. If we drag down to the edge, then it shows predictively, hey guys, this is where you're going to show. So we wanted good targets and also showing where the result would be. And that would be that case. Now, of course, we were just using these colors kind of, again, grossly and to show how this idea will work, and really realize that we needed to have color coding also for the user. So we create this scheme. The pink or magenta would happen and show when we were talking about anchoring and exclusively anchoring. Then as we entered the next level, the dock level, we would give this sort of purple-blue and show a very translucent predictive area where that would land. And then if we dragged all the way to the edge, we would show this green to essentially show that third level target. And it could this is the result of a lot of back and forth with our developer, with Lukash. Just him and me brainstorming, him doing something every day, showing it, me doing a prototype, coming back, a visual prototype like this in Keynote. Now at this point, I was not working in Design Studio yet because we were still kind of just framing out how the generic docking frame mechanism would work. And so my tools at this point were actually Keynote and to do these animations and communicate with him. And he was using, obviously, Qt Creator. So here we go. This was one of our, this is when the development of those prototypes started to mature a little bit. And you can see here, I have a generic component here, but it's starting to look and feel like we wanted. I actually built a lot of these components and the behaviors in Design Studio, and then he was using them, consuming them, and using them, bringing the prototype up to speed. And here you can see we have essentially a min-max principle. On a click, it would expand and contract. And so this is, again, this anchoring behavior where we can have these sort of translucent dialog boxes or property boxes or whatever we need to put in here, any kind of UI standard which would essentially work with this on this glass layer. And this is how we are going to achieve this how this actually would work and get this really open just-in-time UI kind of feeling. Now, meanwhile, back at the ranch, I was getting in, and other members of our team, UX team, were starting to build the components. As you saw, a couple of them are in place. Here we are essentially creating this interactive vertical tab, which will be doing all the window handling at the docking level. And I was responsible for building look and feel, the behavior, all the states, the different characters. You can sort of see the right here. This was the posted state, which means it would become slightly more opaque when you were hovering and working on it. And you had a kind of hovered state, tab state, and also a drag and drop state. And here you can see, how we started evolving. We wanted these sort of we wanted a big target for while we were using the product, but we also needed a smaller area so that it would kind of disappear or be as small as possible. So we wanted as small targets for identifying where we were dragging and dropping, and have it expand and animate out to give you a bigger target while you're actually interacting with it. So this is kind of a optimization there as well. And here is, again, this is not the final product, but this is a more evolved version of the well, let's call it the development alpha. We're starting to hook up a lot of placeholder icons, a lot of placeholder stuff, but we have here a catalog, of parts that we're drag and drop into the scene, beams, walls, things like that. A property palette or panel here, which is how you would define and tweak, and then a toolbar over on the right side that was two-axis, and we called it the process toolbar. It would interact with you. You could change different stuff. So here we go. So here you can see can play with this thing. It becomes active. It becomes more opaque. You can see I'm getting all the different indicators of what do I want it to be docked to the edge. All the split lines were responsive and carried those elements. We could drag and drop 3D panels, create tabs, be able to switch between the tabs themselves, and still you can see that anchoring would hold. We had a cool toolbar that would automatically, in the 4 quadrants, optimize its orientation so that it would work with the design wherever that is to get as much out of the way but still be a floating toolbar. And now I'll just kind of play with this and show how we could then nest pieces together. So we could essentially put it in the bottom if we wanted to have a big catalog. If we want to have a small catalog, we can nest it inside, play with the splitter, and optimize that sort of always up part. So this was our notion of if we either wanted, if it was docked, it means we wanted to have it up 24/7, and if it was at the glass layer, it was something that we wanted to be just in time and on demand, essentially showing and hiding as needed to still maximize essentially the workspace, but also maximize the user's intention. If I'm doing a lot of work with property palette, I want it up all the time. I don't want to have to be bothering with it opening and closing. I want to have a dedicated area for it. So this is the result of several months worth of work to get to this level, and a great partnership and a great management team, and allowing us to do what we need to do to figure out something that's truly innovative that you haven't seen somewhere else. And that's what really gets me up in the morning, to not just do a standard thing, some kind of component we can take off. Everything, every aspect of the software, we customized it the UX designers were customizing and building all the components in Qt Designer, and we were collaborating with our great development team to actually implement it and put that tooling into the product itself. And this product is in early beta right now, and will hopefully be shipping by May, June this year. So I want to thank you all. Appreciate your time, and I'm happy to take the first question.